foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Of course, we will later in the broadcast take you back to Las Vegas and talk a little bit about some of the things we've learned about the shooter, as well as some of the circumstances surrounding that. But I did recognize that sometimes in the midst of all this, we spent a fair amount of time yesterday talking about it and wanted to give you a little bit of a break, which we had planned anyway, because this month is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And so I thought it would be especially apropos for us today to spend a little bit of time talking about Martin Luther, as well as many of the other individuals who were responsible for what today we call the Protestant Reformation. So we are going to spend some time talking about a book that came out last year called Rescuing the Gospel, the Story and Significance of the Reformation. The author of that book is an individual that's been on this program with us many times before, served for so many years as the pastor of the Mully Church, and was there for 36 years. Individual that holds a PhD, as well as been an author of so many different books that we've interviewed here on Point of View over the years, and now serves as the pastor emeritus of Mully Church. And Dr. Erwin Lutzer, just always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you so much, Kirby. Great to be with you.
I might just mention that this book is still available, and it is published by Baker. But I would be remiss if I didn't say happy birthday to you, Dr. Lutzer. Today is your birthday, as I understand.
It really is. And, time goes by quickly. And in case your audience is wondering, I am 76 today. So life goes on. My father lived to 103, my mother to 106. So I might still have a few years, but I am getting older.
Well, and again, you haven't missed a step. I had a chance to hear you speak recently at Prestonwood Baptist Church, and that was a delight. And, of course, this book is one that I would want to put in everybody's hands, because before we get into the details, talk about the significance of this. You take tours to Europe on a regular basis. You've been to all the places pretty much that you talk about in the book. But I think whether people can ever make it to Europe and have a Reformation tour, or whether they just stay at home and read your book, there's just a lot of history that we need to know to understand how we have the doctrines that we preach today in our churches.
We really do, and the Reformation has affected us in ways that people are oftentimes not aware of. Not to go into this detail, but, for example, Luther and Katie, their marriage, some of the marriage customs that we have today still go back to that time. But more importantly, the thing that we think about is the Reformation and those truths that made the church great. And of course, as you know, there are solas that are connected with that. The Latin word sola means alone, the Bible alone, faith alone, grace alone, Christ alone, for the glory of God alone. But what we must understand, Kirby, is some of the issues that the Reformation faced, we still face today. And I always maintain that the better we understand the past, the better we understand our present, and to some extent also it prepares us for our future. So we're talking about a history here that has really affected probably everyone who is listening today. And we need to see that relevance and the importance of the issues.
Well, let's go back in time to the Middle Ages, the medieval period, and you begin the book by talking about the fact that Christianity can survive without the gospel. And what you mean that is that there can be a form of Christianity which actually developed during the medieval times, Well, which even survives to this day, in which the gospel is not central. And since we're talking about rescuing the gospel, talk about the world in which Martin Luther found himself and some of the other reformers found themselves, because that is really key to understand why we have the Reformation.
It was a world in which traditions grew up, and these traditions were given the very same value and the very same attention as the Bible. It was a world in which you had indulgences being sold, which, by the way, the church continues to give out indulgences. They may not sell them today, but indulgences were being sold. It was the day in which there was simony, that is the purchasing of spiritual offices with money. It was a time when, you viewed a relic and you paid a gift, and that would somehow help you to accumulate the kind of righteousness that you need to meet God. You hoped that it would all add up, the disciplines of the church, the confessions of the church. And, of course, in the middle of it all were the sacraments and the belief that grace is communicated through those sacraments. And if you take them regularly and often enough, hopefully, again, you'll have accumulated the amount of righteousness that you need. Luther did all that and more. And even when he confessed his sins up to 6 hours at a time, because he believed that every single sin had to be confessed in order to be forgiven, and he racked his memory, the fact is, even if he could remember all of his sins and confess them all, tomorrow was a brand new day. It was like trying to mop up the floor with the faucet running.
Yes.
So Luther found himself in a dilemma, in a religious system that was very oppressive. There was no freedom of religion. When Luther, by the way, stood before the emperor and said, "My conscience is held captive by the word of God, I will not recant," the idea, Kirby, that a single monk's conscience could be above the Pope and 1,000 years of tradition was unthinkable. That's why the emperor wanted to have him killed. Now, that didn't happen for some reasons, but the point is, Luther planted a seed that grew eventually into religious freedom that we take for granted today. So all of these things were happening in the midst of Christendom, the corruption, the belief in many different sacraments and gods and relics and prayers and candles, and it did not bring peace to Luther's heart.
Wow. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, just before we get into Martin Luther, I wanted to talk a little bit about two individuals that precede him. One is John Wycliffe, the other is John Huss, because I know that's important in terms of understanding the context. But then we're going to focus on Martin Luther and on the Reformation, which, again, begins with nailing the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door. And so if you would want to know a little bit more about this, first of all, I encourage you to kind of sit back, maybe take some notes and listen. We also, of course, have a link to the book, which is very easy to find. It may be in your bookstore, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to order. Rescuing the Gospel, the Story and Significance of the Reformation, which unfolded in the cathedrals and the town squares of Europe and Wittenberg and Worms and places like Rome and Geneva and Zurich and other places. So we'll spend some time talking about that as well. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about Dr. Erwin Lutzer, of course, we have some links there to all his other books that you might want to know more about. And many of them, of course, as you might imagine, are published by Moody Press, or this particular one published as well by another publisher. So we're going to spend some time getting into this, teaching you a little bit more about all of these issues, and recommending that you do what you can to study on this. This particular book, 220 pages, published by Baker Bookhouse, and it is, again, a book that helps you understand the gospel and the Reformation. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Erwin Lutzer right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, Americans don't know much about the Constitution, and it apparently is getting worse.
9 years ago, I wrote and recorded a commentary about constitutional literacy. Back then, I quoted John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who testified before a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee concerning the rule of law. He provided some alarming statistics based upon a survey done about 10 years ago. They found that only 1 in 4 Americans could name more than one of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. In one study, they found that only 1 person out of 1,000 people could name all 5 First Amendment freedoms. Those would be the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly, along with the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. I thought about those statistics when I read an editorial written by Cal Thomas. He quoted from a recent poll conducted by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. They found that 37% of those interviewed could not name any of the 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. You know, nearly a decade ago, we were lamenting how few could name more than one of the First Amendment freedoms. Today, more than a third cannot name any of the freedoms in the First Amendment. Americans are not only ignorant of the Constitution, many are ignorant of the structure of government. A third could not name one of the 3 branches of government, and about 1/4 could correctly name all 3. Unfortunately, some of these Americans who are ignorant of the Constitution and of our government actually vote in elections. You can't protect the rights guaranteed in the Constitution if you don't know what they are. You can't protect our system of government if you don't know how it is structured. I hope you can see that we have lots of work to do to educate Americans about the Constitution. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Our topic this hour is the Reformation, and we're talking about this book that came out last year, Rescuing the Gospel, the Story and Significance of the Reformation. If you're just joining us, we're doing that because this month is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. We'll be spending a lot of time talking about Martin Luther, but Dr. Erwin Lutzer, before we do so, let's, if we can, focus on at least 2 other individuals you mentioned in your book, and I think it's important to understand again some of the context in which Martin Luther writes the 95 Theses. And the first one is John Wycliffe, oftentimes referred to as the morning star of the Reformation. What do we need to know about him?
Well, of course, his name is synonymous with the Scriptures because he actually taught his disciples how to copy the Bible and how to die for the faith. And that, of course, he was born in the 1300s, so that gives us a context. And, you know, he was Oxford's leading theologian. And he argued against transubstantiation, the idea that the priests had these mysterious powers to take ordinary bread and wine and turn them into the body and the blood of Christ, but also in teaching them how to translate, or I should say copy the Scriptures. Imagine this. He lived before the days of Gutenberg, before you have mass printing. So every copy of the Bible had to be laboriously printed. If I remember correctly, it would take a scribe maybe 10 months to do it. Now, these Bibles were spread throughout England and the English-speaking world, and official Christendom, the church insisted that they be burned. And so people found them, they brought them to St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, if you're in St. Paul's Cathedral in England and you come out the door, if I remember correctly, you turn left where the original statue was of St. Paul. It's been moved now, but the original. And it is in that area that these books were taken and they were burned, specifically the Bible that was burned there.
Wow. Yes.
But here's the exciting thing. The other man you want to talk about is John Hus.
Yes.
There were students that went from Prague to study in Oxford, and they came back with Wycliffe's writings. And these writings, said we're justified by faith, and that the church is corrupt. You don't need to obey the corrupt church. So a man by the name of John Hus, and Kirby, it's so important people understand that his name in the Czech language is Goose.
Goose.
In fact, we were in the Czech Republic this summer, and indeed our guide verified that. So John Hus, his name means goose. He used to sign his letters, the Goose. He is preaching in Bethlehem Chapel. The Pope gets angry. An interdict meant that there were no sacraments in Prague, which to the average person meant that they were going to hell because the sacraments were necessary for salvation. Hus leaves town, but he is brought to the Council of Constance. And the Emperor Sigismund gives him safe conduct, says you can come here and answer charges of heresy and then go home. Hus is taken. They try to break him down, and the emperor doesn't keep his word to a heretic, didn't think he needed to, so Hus is burned. But here's the point. Before he was burned, according to a witness, he said, you can cook this goose, but after me in 100 years, a swan will arise, and him you will not silence.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting that Luther believed that he was the fulfillment of that prophecy, because catch this. Hus dies in 1414 or 1415. 102 years later, Luther nails his famous 95 Theses to the castle church door in Wittenberg and begins the Reformation. And if you're in Europe, you know that the swan often became a symbol of the Reformation, and Luther believed that he was the swan that they could not silence.
From the goose to the swan. So let's go to, a lot of people say, why this October? Well, it was October 31st, 1517, so 500 years ago, posting the 95 Theses. But again, give us a little bit of a background, because we still have Martin Luther struggling with his sins and wearing down the people he's confessing his sins to every day, and struggling with this idea that eventually causes him to understand grace. Can you kind of give us some perspective there about what was going on in the mind and heart of Martin Luther?
This is so critical. People must understand this. Absolutely. He is seeking righteousness. The church taught salvation is by grace, but you have to make yourself worthy of it. You need to prepare yourself for it, and nobody knew whether or not they were worthy or what they had to do. So his confessor, Staupitz, says, teach the Bible. He goes to Wittenberg, where a new university was, eventually ends up teaching the Bible. And here's what Luther uncovered, especially in the book of Romans.
Yes.
That there was a righteousness which belonged to God as an attribute, but there was also a righteousness which God credits to those who believe. And therefore, he pondered the connection between the statement, the just shall live by faith, and the righteousness of God being revealed. And as he studied the rest of the book of Romans, he discovered that sprinkled throughout the book are the statements, the free gift of righteousness. So justification didn't mean just that God was infusing grace into us. It was a legal declaration that God made, and that is that despite your sin, you are credited with the righteousness of Christ. Now think of the deliverance that he experienced. Now it didn't matter how high God's standard was, as long as he didn't have to meet it, as long as Christ met God's requirements for him. No wonder Luther said it was as if I went through the gates of paradise, because the weight was now off of his shoulders. His faith in Christ was what did it. And of course, the other thing that grows directly out of this is the fact that everybody receives the same righteousness who believes the gospel. Therefore, you don't have to go to your priest in order to pray and ask him to pray for you. You pray. You're a priest before God. Therefore, you come on the basis of the righteousness of Jesus Christ, just like anybody else does. You have the same access, the same privilege as God's child. And Luther reveled in the fact that it was no longer up to him, but Jesus had paid it all, and that he needed to simply rest in the finished work of Jesus Christ. And this, of course, is going to prepare him and be the fuel that is going to burn within him as he begins a Reformation, and we're still feeling its effects.
We certainly are. And again, he understood for the first time that when it talks about in the Scriptures that the righteousness of God was not just an attribute of God, but as you said, it was a gift from God to sinners. So no longer did he have to fear the justice of God, but actually he could then partake and actually enjoy the love of God, don't you think?
Oh, exactly, because God's wrath had been averted and turned away because of Christ. And Kirby, I can't help but think that there may be thousands of people listening to us today who are struggling with their sin and the things that they have done. What they need to recognize is salvation. It is not the extent of your wickedness, because to some extent all of us are. There are degrees of wickedness, but still that's not the issue. The issue is the fact that you can receive Christ and have his righteousness credited to you. Luther gave up the doctrine of purgatory very quickly. Purgatory said nobody dies righteous enough to go to heaven. You have to be purged until by the fires of purgatory and then enter. Luther argued correctly that if we have the righteousness of Jesus Christ credited to us, we can go from this life directly to the next and be welcomed into heaven as if we are Jesus, because we're clothed in his righteousness. And this, of course, is the heart of the gospel. Luther basically said this: "O God, I am thy sin." People say, what's my contribution to salvation? Your contribution is your sin. "O God, I am thy sin. Jesus, thou art my righteousness."
Wow. We need to take a break, and we will continue our conversation with Dr. Erwin Lutzer. Let me also, as we go to a break, encourage you to go to the website and maybe even check out some of his other books. Of course, we're talking today about Rescuing the Gospel, the story and significance of the Reformation. A few others I might mention that we've talked about on this program before: The Cross in the Shadow of the Crescent, 1 Minute After You Die, and perhaps one of the best known because it received a gold medallion award, Hitler's Cross. But those are just a few of the many books. I have just one shelf of Erwin Lutzer books on my shelf. So again, there are many books you can obtain, and I would encourage you to read any and all of them, but especially this one. We'll come back. We'll talk about the trial. The dominoes begin to fall. What happens to Martin Luther? We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Erwin Lutzer. His book is entitled Rescuing the Gospel, the Story and Significance of the Reformation. We have a lot to cover here as well. We need to get him married. Of course, he has written a number of different tracts and books and things like that. The Babylonian captivity of the church. He has to go, of course, through a trial and a number of other things. So let's begin, if nothing else, with the response from the Pope in the midst of this, who referred to Luther as a wild boar in the vineyard of the Lord. This was, if nothing else, one of the great turning points in his life, wasn't it?
It really was. And you know, Kirby, we promised our audience that we were going to talk about the 95 Theses for just a second.
Sure.
You know, Luther on October 31st, 1517, that's why we're celebrating the 500th anniversary, is angry because people are buying indulgences to help Pope Leo build St. Peter's Basilica, and these indulgences were not just sold to the living, but also to the dead. And so men like Tetzel would go into the town square and say, "Hear ye, hear ye, your mother is screaming in purgatory, but for a few pence you could get me out of these flames." And so, and then the little jingle, you know, as soon as the coin hits the chest, another soul flies to its heavenly rest. People in Wittenberg bought indulgences and showed them to Luther, and some of them even bought indulgences for sins they had not yet committed but planned to commit. So Luther, in anger, nails the 95 Theses to the castle church door on October 31st, 1517, and they are written in Latin. Somebody translates them into German. Gutenberg had invented the printing press. They are spread throughout Germany, and all the Germans are agreeing, and so that's the way the Reformation started. It was as if Luther pulled a stone from a mountain, not knowing that he was going to begin an avalanche. He certainly did not intend to begin a Reformation. But once it got started and he developed his own theology, he realized it was inevitable. So now, to your question, Luther, there's a new emperor by the name of Charles V. Charles V is an ardent Catholic from Spain. He wants to kill Luther, but he knew that if he did that without a trial, all the Germans would be mad at him. And he needed the support of the Germans in his war against the Turks. The Ottoman Empire was developing, and the Turkish armies were circling Vienna. So the Pope needed the help of the Germans. So they set up a time in Worms. Actually, a W in German is pronounced like a V. But most Americans not knowing that, they talk about the diet of worms. I always jokingly say, now that's a diet that will really work. But it was in Worms, and this is so critical. If we understand this, we'll understand that this was the great dividing line in the Reformation. Luther is brought before the council. He's asked to recant. He says, "Give me until the next day." That night he prays a prayer that just takes your breath away, talking about, you know, "Oh God, where are you going to be for me? Will you be there when I'm put on the rack?" He expected to die the next day. That was the belief that Luther had. The emperor wanted to kill him. And Luther goes before the council and says these words, which all Christians should really memorize and teach their children. It is one of the great acts of courage in church history that changed everything. Luther said, "Unless I am convinced by Scripture and plain reason, for I do not accept the decision of popes and councils, for they contradict one another. My conscience is held captive by the word of God. To go against conscience is neither right nor safe. I cannot and I will not recant. So help me God. Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise.
Yes.
Wow.
Powerful.
He was allowed to leave the room. The emperor the next day wrote the Edict of Worms, which basically said, let Luther go back home. He had given him safe conduct and wanted to keep his word. And what happened is the Edict of Worms says, but after he's back in Wittenberg, anyone can kill him without reprisal. And Luther is on his way home. Do we have time in this segment, Kirby, for me to tell the people what happened then?
Sure, we certainly do, because
Okay,
we want to
we
get him
do.
to the castle here, don't we? We've got to get him to the castle before we get into the break.
We have to get him to the castle,
Yes.
right. So what happened is Luther's on his way home with a horse and a wagon. 5 men jump out of the ditch. They capture him, and they hide him in the Wartburg Castle. These actually were his friends.
Mm-hmm.
The elector, Luther's prince, had put them up to it and said, capture Luther, hide him in the Wartburg so that he won't be put to death when he gets back to Wittenberg. So Luther's in the Wartburg Castle, very famous story. I was there again this summer. I've been in that room many times. It is said that he threw an inkwell at the devil. And tour guides used to rub a little bit of soot on the wall because they wanted to see where the inkwell landed. Well, I'm not sure that he threw an inkwell at the devil. He said, I fought the devil with ink.
Ink, yes.
What he meant was, in that room, in just 11 weeks, he translated the entire New Testament, not the Old Testament, that took much longer, the entire New Testament from the original Greek into a German that the people could actually read, a vernacular German. And that's the way, that you fight the devil. You don't throw an inkwell at him. You give people the Word of God. And that Luther translation, of course, he had help with the Old Testament and so forth. Huge impact on Germany, something like the King James in English, and unified the German language and so forth. And as I like to point out to audiences, my parents were German. They were born in the Ukraine. They came to Canada. They married. I was born there in Canada. Every single morning they read to us from the German Bible. And one day as a child, I looked at the Bible and opened the flyleaf, and there it was, Luther's translation. The impact is absolutely huge. And you know what, Kirby, we need today in America? Everybody says, what do we need? We need Christians who are willing to say, my conscience is held captive by the Word of God. I cannot and I will not recant. I'm drawing a line in the sand, and I'm willing to pay the consequences of my obedience to God.
Well said. I might just mention, too, that in your book, Rescuing the Gospel, the Story and Significance of the Reformation, you can see the Bible. You can also see the hymnal, which I want to talk about for in just a minute. You can see the Wartburg Castle. You can see Wittenberg. You can see a lot of things. It would be wonderful if you could actually go on a tour with Dr. Erwin Lutzer to Europe, but even if you cannot, in some respects, you have a chance to do so. And just before we take a break, of course, we know Martin Luther for so many of his writings, but we also know him for at least a few of his hymns, perhaps the most famous, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, I think he wrote that probably when he was hiding in the Coburg Castle. See, for the rest of his life, Luther was a fugitive from justice because what Charles had written about killing him and so forth, that was never rescinded. So when there were delegates meeting in Augsburg, Luther was not in attendance. Melanchthon, his sidekick, was there, and Luther was in this massive castle. I have been in the castle at Coburg, or maybe it was written in the Wartburg Castle, but I think probably the other castle. Huge. So this becomes the basis of A Mighty Fortress is Our God, based, of course, on Psalm 46. And Luther wrote these hymns. He was an unbelievable man. All the things that he wrote, of course, he had some real negative spots in his life, some darkness, but his impact absolutely huge. And every time we sing some of his hymns, and that being the most famous, we go back to the days when Martin Luther was not only writing theology, one book after another, but also hymns.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll just finish off by talking briefly, and it will, of course, be briefly, about the fact that once the Reformation began, you have Calvin and Zwingli and the Anabaptist and a number of other things, so we'll get into some of that, and we'll also give you a chance to, again, just kind of think about some of the response and even the impact that the Reformation has had. And since it is October, especially October 31st, don't just focus on Halloween, focus on Reformation Day. And 500 years ago, it began with the 95 Theses on the door to Wittenberg. You can go there to this day and see those put up there in a metal case so that you can see a little bit more about what Martin Luther wrote back then. We are, and then, the inheritors of all of this. We need to take a break, though. We'll talk more about the impact right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can you claim the First Amendment to get out of a ticket? CBM Ministries operates a release time Bible education program in Pennsylvania. Release time allows public school students to be released during the school day for religious classes located off campus, oftentimes at a local church. But it's not the release time that's at issue in this case. It's the way the students get from school to the church. When one of the drivers showed up at the school to pick up the kids, a state trooper noticed that the bus was not properly inspected. The trooper cited the driver for violating state law concerning school bus safety. As you might expect, without buses to safely transport students from school to release time education and back, CBM Ministries had a problem. So they filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit claimed that the enforcement of school bus safety laws on CBM Ministries vehicles substantially burdened its religious exercise. The court acknowledged that the law may have had an incidental impact upon the ministry's religious exercise, but it was actually entirely neutral towards religion. In other words, the law regulated school buses, whether used for religious or secular purposes. The law did not discriminate, nor was it applied in a discriminatory manner. Religious liberty protects against laws that discriminate on the basis of religion, but it probably won't get you out of that speeding ticket. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I hope you appreciate the history lesson that we're receiving today from Dr. Erwin Lutzer. Let me just mention again, as you go to our website, you can download a podcast or go to the YouTube channel and listen to it or pass it on to others, maybe play it for your children and really educate all of us about this. And Dr. Lutzer, we only have a few minutes, so I thought we might just move from Martin Luther briefly to talk about a few other people, Huldrych Zwingli, John Calvin, the Anabaptists, because it isn't just Martin Luther, but it's what began the whole Protestant Reformation. You have whole chapters on that, so it's unfair to ask you as an author to try to summarize them, but that's the best we can do. Can you share a little bit about what we have learned even since Martin Luther and how that's affected the Protestant churches?
Oh, yes. Calvin, of course, is in France. He reads Luther's writings. he becomes a believer in the gospel. He goes to Geneva, and he writes a book, even before he gets to Geneva, entitled The Institutes of the Christian Religion. That becomes the textbook for much of Europe for 200 years. How do we think that the Netherlands, for example, became reformed? Well, they became reformed by reading Calvin. There were also preachers and other factors, but tremendous influence. So that's where you have Calvinism. Zwingli, of course, is in Zurich, Switzerland. He is mentoring some men who come to the conclusion that infant baptism isn't in the Bible. They study it, and they discover that it's not there, and they say, we're going to baptize each other upon profession of faith. But the Zurich City Council said, anyone who is baptized upon profession of faith as an adult must be put to death by drowning, by sword, or by fire. And these guys go ahead and do it anyway. Now, why did the city council say that? It's because in those days, Kirby, it's so hard for us to get our minds around this, but the belief was that Christendom, this monolithic thing called Christendom, could not be broken up. The belief was that if we start to baptize people who believe only, the church will become a group within society rather than coextensive with it. And this idea of a unified regional church, even the reformers did not want to give it up for love nor money, because the idea was that Christianity will be splintered. And I might say that that prediction came true, didn't it, when you think of all the Protestant denominations. But I love to tell this story. Among those who was willing to die for the faith and was baptized was Felix Mons. Now, we know exactly in Zurich, exactly at the point in the river in which he was put in a little boat, and then it was deliberately capsized, and he was drowned in the dark, deep waters of the Lamont River. And he became the first in a series of people. Now, Anabaptism, as it was called, the rebaptizers, spread throughout Europe, and soon whole villages of men, women, and children were massacred because of their faith in Christ. Out of that, of course, you have the Mennonites and other groups come. But the point is that they were willing to die for their deep conviction. And the conviction was that the church cannot be coextensive with a corrupt society. It is a unique group, and therefore entrance to it should be by faith in Christ alone. Baptism was a sign of it, and they went ahead and they did it anyway. And their faith in Christ, their willingness to die, the fire of God burned within their hearts. Hundreds were put to death. And it is a tragic story in the history of the Christian church. One of the things that I think is so important that I want to emphasize, that I have emphasized in my book and in all of my teaching, is the tremendous price paid for the proclamation and the deep belief of the gospel.
Yes. Just incredible. Just before we end, let's talk about the solas that you talked about a minute ago. Sola scriptura, by scripture alone. Sola fide, by faith alone. Sola gratia, by grace alone. That legacy continues even to this day, doesn't it?
It really does. Sola scriptura, the Bible alone. When Luther entered into debates, the issue is, what is your authority? The church said, we have the Pope and tradition. Luther said, the Bible alone. So you have faith alone. That means that salvation is a free gift given to those who believe in response to faith. And even the faith that we have, many of us believe, is God-given, but the point is we contribute nothing. No works. Works flow from that, but we are not saved by works at all. We make no contribution. Then, of course, you have grace alone, which kind of encapsulates it all. It is by grace. Now, the church taught, yes, salvation is by grace, but you have to make yourself worthy of that grace. The reformers said, no, we come as unworthy to receive grace. And that grace is given to us in Jesus Christ as a gift. And then, of course, you have Christ alone as the only way to the Father, sola Christus. and then sola Deo Gloria, to the glory of God alone.
Just incredible. All of it is in your book, Rescuing the Gospel, by Dr. Erwin Lutzer. And if people wanted to know more, obviously they can find that book in their bookstore. It's published by Baker Books, or we have a link to the website. But if somebody would like to join you in a future tour, or they'd like to know more about you, are there ways in which people can contact you and find out more?
Yeah, moodymedia.org is the place that you have to get used to. God willing, I'm going to be leading a tour to the sites of the Reformation in England next June, going to Israel this coming March. So if people are interested, they can find more information there. moodymedia.org.
And we have that link there, and also it is advertising your journey to Israel and some of the others. So, again, everything you need is on our website, pointofview.net, including the book, including contact to Dr. Erwin Lutzer. And so, Dr. Lutzer, just always a delight to have you on our program today. And, again, we want to wish you happy birthday.
Thank you, Kirby. God bless you and your vast audience.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we might take some of your phone calls. We're going to get into an open line a little bit later, but I did want to do a couple of things real quickly, and that is in the second hour, we want to talk about this movie Mully, because some have been asking about that, and so we're going to interview the individual that is part of that. We always like to feature some of the Christian films that you need to know about. And then we're going to get back to Las Vegas. There's a lot to talk about today. We know a lot more about the shooter. We know a lot more about some of the weapons that he used. We know that there's going to be an ongoing debate about the Second Amendment. There's going to be debates about motive and all sorts of other things. What could we have done differently? So we will spend some time in the second hour doing that. But I hope you appreciate the fact that sometimes in the midst of these controversial issues, in the midst of these tragedies, sometimes it's just good to pull back for just a little bit and look at our history. And again, given the fact that this month is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, I thought that you would appreciate this conversation. And if you do appreciate that, let me first of all encourage you to pass this on to someone else. We have a way for you to listen to this broadcast again by downloading a podcast. This is something I really encourage some of you to consider sharing around the family dinner table. Many young people have very little understanding of where the church comes from, what the Reformation was all about, why we have these denominations, and so this would be a very good way to share some of this. Of course, the book goes into a lot more detail, and I would encourage you to buy a copy of the book and give your kids a reward if they read through the book and write you a book report on it. They will learn a lot, and it will be really helpful for their Christian growth. Of course, you can also watch it because we have the YouTube channel there as well. So as you go to the website, I would encourage you to get some of that material. And if you find yourself saying, I haven't heard some of this in a long time, or I've never heard this, would you think about maybe clicking on that button that says donate? Because again, that helps us bring these kinds of programs to you every day. Let's take a break. We're going to talk about the movie Mully. Then we're going to get back into Las Vegas, and we have a lot to cover, and we'll do that in the second hour right after these messages.
Chuck Bentley of Crown Financial Ministries believes you hold the key to powerful and lasting change. You can be a hero.
Are you happy with what you're seeing in our culture? Are you really pleased with the direction of this country? If you're not, then do your duty. Give. Make an investment. Put your money where your heart's desire is to make a difference.
You don't need a colorful cape and costume to be a hero. All you need is to get off the bench and into the game, and to support the fight for faith, family, and freedom. Join the team. Join Truth Team 360 with Point of View Radio. We need heroes to step up this week, today, and do what you can. Visit pointofview.net/team and choose your level of support. Be an important part of Point of View's 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities.
It will be a gift that pays off for eternity.
Pointofview.net/team, or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
One of the things we like to do here on Point of View is promote a number of Christian films. So we're going to do that for just a few minutes, talk about something that is happening today and tomorrow and the next couple of days. So again, this is something you would like to participate in, because as always, I love to send signals to Hollywood and to other Christian film producers that we want more of those kinds of films. Then we're going to get back into some of the news. If you're just joining us, first hour, we had a chance to talk about the Reformation. We have the 500th anniversary of the Reformation taking place this month, and Dr. Erwin Lutzer was with us as we talked about his book, Rescuing the Gospel. It's published by Baker Books, and if you'd like to hear that interview, it's available on our website, and I would encourage you to maybe even take it and pass it on to others. But before we get into some of the news, I wanted you to know about this new movie called Mully, and it is really based upon the life and the incredible testimony of Dr. Charles Mully. Was born in Kenya, an individual whose parents were in extreme poverty. When he was about 6 years of age, they left in search for a better living. They abandoned him to the care of his aunt, who was also impoverished, and an individual that ended up being quite successful. We're going to hear his story in just a minute. Earned later on certificates in evangelism and accounting, and eventually courses in evangelism and theology. Eventually was awarded 2 different honorary doctorates from a college and seminary and also from a university. An individual that really has just an inspiring story. And we encourage you to not only go to the film, but to learn more about Mully's Orphan Fund, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But first of all, let me welcome to the microphone Dr. Charles Mully. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be in your studios today.
We, of course, have a difficult phone line, but we're going to do the best we can with it so that people can know a little bit more. Of course, I have encouraged everyone to go to our website, pointofview.net. We, first of all, have posted this trailer on the movie. It's 2 minutes long. It's called Mully, The Story of Faith. And I would encourage you, first of all, to watch it, and that will give you a little bit of an idea what the film is all about, and then to click on the share button and put it on your Facebook page, send it to someone by email, whatever it might be. And if you want to then come to the movie, click on his picture there. There's a place where it says buy tickets, and I just a minute ago clicked on that, put in my zip code, and there were 24 different movie theaters within driving distance that I could go and watch this movie. So again, nationwide premiere happening 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th of October. But Dr. Mully, for just a few minutes, tell us your story, because this is inspiring, and as people watch the film, they'll learn a little bit more about your life and how you've reached out to all those in extreme poverty.
Oh, yes. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity of being able to share my story. Way back when I was 5 to 6 years, I found that all my parents, my mother, my father, were nowhere to be found. At the same time, we lived on a very extreme poverty, stricken family. And at the same time, that my father was so rough. He was so addicted to alcohol, which really completely ruined our family. Therefore, from 5 to 6 years up to 16 years, I had no hope. And through that, I wanted to commit suicide to take away my life because of hopelessness. I did not know what to do, but I came to learn that was not the solution, and therefore somebody saw me desperate and they invited me to a church. That was a long time ago, and therefore I found the young people singing and dancing. They were happy, but myself, I was out of complete place, and I was in grief and the sorrow and in the bitterness. But that I learned about how to forgive, because the pastor who was there, he spoke about the forgiveness, and therefore I felt compelled to change my life, and the power that was there, I was completely changed. And from that time, at the age of 16 years old, I decided to go to the city of Nairobi. I walked.
Walked all the way to Nairobi, Kenya. Just amazing.
Yeah, to Nairobi. And I was there just looking for a job, knocking doors. But fortunately, one of the residential house, a woman came, an Asian lady, and she opened the door. She asked me, "Why are you here? Why are you disturbing us?" And therefore, quickly, I explained my problem. And after that, she was able to give me food, accommodation, and then employment. After which, I was able to really to settle down. And then afterward, I got a job through them, that family. I was employed as a field clerk and then assistant manager. I bought a vehicle. That vehicle made it to be a taxi. I enjoyed playing music. Then after that, and it built a big business of transport of buses, and I was also able to start another business and another one, insurance company, real estate. And through that, I got money. I had enough for my family. Already I had gotten a wife and 8 children, biological children.
Yeah, you were very successful as an entrepreneur. That's one of the things that's kind of striking. That's part of the film, isn't it?
Yes, of course, because I became an entrepreneur. I was originally anything small from when I was young, make it really multiply. And so that was my spirit of entrepreneurship, also loving people, appreciating. But one day I happened to go to the city of Nairobi to do business, and therefore after that I met street boys who surrounded me. They asked me for money. I told them, no, I cannot give you money. And then they made a plan, after which when I came 30 minutes later, I found that my car was not there. It was stolen by those street boys. And therefore, that was a turning point. In 1986, I really felt so bad. I felt like I felt guilty because I was reminded of my past life. When I saw children in the street, when I saw mothers in the slum crying because of lack of food and problem, abuse, I saw my face in
yourself.
Then I started thinking, what can I do for them? I had so much. In 1989, I could not work anymore since I had everything that a man could have. And then I started thinking, how can I do it? And so through power of God, He really pressured my life to give it all for the sake of the children. And over those times,
let's take a break here real quickly. I want to come back and talk about that in a little bit of detail, but we have one of our mandatory breaks. But here, an individual, successful entrepreneur, does very well in Nairobi, Kenya, and God says, give it all up, and now transform the lives of thousands and thousands of children. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Dr. Charles Mully, and also encourage you to find out more about the film. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, Americans don't know much about the Constitution, and it apparently is getting worse.
9 years ago, I wrote and recorded a commentary about constitutional literacy. Back then, I quoted John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who testified before a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee concerning the rule of law. He provided some alarming statistics based upon a survey done about 10 years ago. They found that only 1 in 4 Americans could name more than one of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. In one study, they found that only 1 person out of 1,000 people could name all 5 First Amendment freedoms. Those would be the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly, along with the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. I thought about those statistics when I read an editorial written by Cal Thomas. He quoted from a recent poll conducted by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. They found that 37% of those interviewed could not name any of the 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. You know, nearly a decade ago, we were lamenting how few could name more than one of the First Amendment freedoms. Today, more than a third cannot name any of the freedoms in the First Amendment. Americans are not only ignorant of the Constitution, many are ignorant of the structure of government. A third could not name one of the 3 branches of government, and about 1/4 could correctly name all 3. Unfortunately, some of these Americans who are ignorant of the Constitution and of our government actually vote in elections. You can't protect the rights guaranteed in the Constitution if you don't know what they are. You can't protect our system of government if you don't know how it is structured. I hope you can see that we have lots of work to do to educate Americans about the Constitution. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Dr. Charles Mully. And again, the movie is about him, and this is a website that we direct you to that is part of Focus on the Family. So I think you really appreciate knowing about the film that is airing tonight, tomorrow night, and the next night, so October 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So let me encourage you to find out a little bit more. And Dr. Mully, again, you had 8 children, biological children, but pretty soon you had a lot more children. And over the years, I know that the Mully Children's Family has actually been able to transform the lives of about 12,000 children from a state of homelessness and poverty and extreme poverty to individuals that have been able to be very successful. So really, that's kind of what the film is all about, isn't it?
Oh, yes. It is about the operation that we have in terms of transforming the children to be able to give them hope through food that we give every day, about clothing, it's about health care, and that love, and whereby also when they're there, they feel so much connected with the Mully Children's Family. And education has been always a key component into the lives of children, and therefore that is what I've been able to put as our first priority, because when they stay with us and they give them the good education, then they become self-reliant, and they are able to do, for example, we have doctors, engineers, lawyers, and farmers, and business people, as well as preachers or pastors, and therefore community development officers and so forth. And then my aim always is to ensure that the children who come to us, even though they might be not 100%, all of them be able to go to the top, but others, they get vocational training through building and construction, plumbing, as well as electrical engineering, and the sewing, cloth designing, and textiles, plus beauty therapy, and so many of these courses that we teach them. So Mully Children's Family, it is a place where all the tribes in our country, over 42 tribes in our country, Kenya, they get place, and even from Tanzania, where we have also extended our generosity to support those who are poor, orphans, those who are formerly from the street, then give them life. So that's what we are doing.
The movie is entitled, again, Mully, and I love what Roma Downey says. You will be inspired and amazed at how one man's sacrifice can change the world. And really kind of the subtitle of the movie is Changing the World One Child at a Time. Dr. Charles Mully, before I let you go, let's, if we can, talk about what people will see when they see the movie. Obviously, it tells your story, and it tells the story of the Mully children's family. Lots of times listeners want to know, well, is this one where I can bring the whole family? Will my children want to come to this movie? Is it something that they could watch? Give us a little bit of an understanding of what will happen when they get into the theater.
Indeed, the whole movie is full of love. And one of the most important things is about the forgiveness. Because in myself, personally, I forgave my own parent, my father, and we reconciled. And that was the beginning of great things that God gave me to reconcile with my father and loved him, and until when he died about 2 years ago. And so what the parents, what people, even you do see, it is about humility, being so humble, come down, so that you can be able to have these young people, these children, into their level and find out what is that which is really troubling them. Then the other thing is about faith. They will learn about faith when we have faith in what we do, and they continue to consistently believe on that, and we do the great and the good things to others, especially the poor children, the mothers, the street mothers, and so forth. That is where the heart of God is. And those people will also be able to see, again, the hope, hope restored. And it will help them to even look at themselves, how they can also move forward in this world where there are many challenges. They will also be able to see love. With the love, it seals and it brings everything together to be able to become possible and move forward to change even our world today. Our world today needs love. We need reconciliation through forgiveness. Unless we do that, then our world will become a bad place. It can be a good place. When you see this movie, there is hope, there is forgiveness, there is reconciliation, there is love, and all this drives to the people of every country in the world to be able to get together and move together as a big family in the world.
Again, the movie is entitled Mully, and you can find it in your local theaters, and we have a link to focus on the family and the information about the movie. We also, of course, have the trailer, and what we always encourage you to do is watch the trailer. It's about 2 minutes long, and then send it on to some others that may want to know about that as well. Dr. Charles Mully, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a great day, and I wish America a peaceful time as we look forward for greater things.
Thank you very much. Let me just mention before we go to the break here some of the things we'll talk about after the bottom of the hour. And one of those has been, of course, the fallout from the terrific and horrific, if is probably a better word, actions in Las Vegas. And as the editors of National Review put it, the massacre in Las Vegas was horrifying, the reaction to it dispiriting, pointing out the fact that, as we always seem to see in the midst of some of these mass shootings, that all sorts of people weigh in with all sorts of political statements. Of course, there was about a little bit of misinformation yesterday. Of course, we talked about the fact that there didn't seem to be much evidence that this was an individual that was tied to ISIS, and I think we kind of set that aside. But they point out a couple of other examples. For example, Vox, they said, sprinted to report that since Trump took office, more Americans have been killed by white American men with no connection to Islam than by Muslim terrorists or foreigners, unquote. Well, I guess that's true. Donald Trump has only been in office since the late part of January, and during that time, there, of course, have been no Muslim terrorist attacks. So, yeah, I guess that's true, but you can see how that's an attempt to try to push a particular agenda. The editor of the Huffington Post demanded to know why automatic rifles had not already been restricted. Now, when she was informed that automatic rifles have been severely restricted for decades, she explained that she meant semi-automatic rifles, but did not seem to know the difference. The editors say this is about on par with some of the things we're running into in terms of some of the gun control debate. And again, the desire to try to do something, and we're going to come back and talk about, is there something we can do? Well, the first thing is to recognize, as they point out, that one of the maddening things about violence in the United States is that so much of it, if not exactly predictable, is at least predictable. That is, the majority of murders, for example, in places like New York City and other major American cities are committed by men with prior criminal histories, often for violent crimes and not infrequently for weapons violations. So if we want to do something, it is maybe not as high profile as passing another piece of gun control legislation, but there are certainly things that we can and should do. And so when we want to come back, we want to talk about that for just a minute, but also get into, since the gun control debate's going to surface, of the 23 firearms that were found in that hotel room that was actually held by the killer, the gunman, whatever you want to call him. We know a little bit more about how he obtained those and where those were obtained, which, again, I think illustrate only so well that you can come up with some of the most draconian gun control legislation imaginable, and it's not really going to make much of a difference. And then we'll talk about some of the reactions to this and some of the other facts and figures that we now know in terms of the Las Vegas shooting. So if you'd like to join us in this last half hour, I've sort of held off the calls until now, but let's open up an open line in this last half hour. If you'd like to join us on the shooting in Las Vegas, about gun control, about the need for us to begin to think about how we handle people that maybe are mentally ill or despondent, although that doesn't seem to be the case with this individual, or whatever other issue you want to put on the table, we certainly welcome your phone calls. So this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We will cover some of these issues. We'll give you a chance to weigh in with your comments, and all that happens right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We've got a number of calls coming in. We'll get to those in just a minute. I might just mention we have posted a couple of articles. The one that I quoted from yesterday by David French, Las Vegas shooting very strange. And since then, some other people have quoted from it as well. And since I did not post it yesterday, we've posted it there today. Nancy Pelosi believes we need to have a select committee on gun violence. So I've posted that article as well, so you can kind of see what the debate is taking place and who's saying what. And in a minute, if we have some time, I'll quote from some of the Twitter posts by Chris Murphy in Connecticut, who accuses all the members of the Senate that aren't going for gun control of cowardice. Bernie Sanders saying we have to do something. Elizabeth Warren saying that thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need to go do something. And we'll get into what that do something looks like. But let's give you an update on what we've been able to learn so far. 23 firearms found in the hotel room occupied by the Las Vegas killer, gunman, whoever you want to call him. Now, we know where some of those firearms came from, interestingly enough. He bought 6 of them at a Cabela's in Reno. We know that he got a shotgun from Utah. And as a matter of fact, I've seen the interview with the man who said there was no red flags. He filled out all the ATF forms. By the way, by the time you add up all the, and I'm going to talk about what was in his home too, at least $100,000 of ammunition and guns, probably more so, but I'll just use that as a baseline, which is kind of interesting given the fact that his brother, who is in Florida, said he was not an avid gun guy. Well, I don't know. I mean, we got 23 firearms found in the hotel room. Another, what was it, 16? Or where do we, how many we have in there? I'll see the number there in just a minute. 18 in his home, not to mention all the ammunition and those kinds of things. Now, the big question that a lot of people have had is, did he have automatic weapons? Well, it looks like now he was able to buy a lot of ammo at a gun store. I guess it was at a gun show in Phoenix, and he got 2 aftermarket gun stocks. And those are what is called bump fire. And I don't want to get into too much of this, but it's where, you know, as you fire, the recoil fires your finger again, so it goes like that. But there have been some people that are saying, you know, this still sounded more like automatic weapons fire, so maybe he filed down the sear pin, or maybe he had some other modifications to that as well. But nevertheless, 23 firearms found in his hotel room. But then another 18 others, firearms, explosives, and several thousand rounds of ammunition in his Las Vegas home, which is actually a mesquite. And again, the Clark County Sheriff offered the fact that he had never seen so much ammunition in one individual's possession before. And this is so contradictory, seemingly, from his brother, who said, well, my brother's really not an avid gun guy. The owners of gun stores that did remember him said that he passed their background check, so he did everything legally. And so when we get to this discussion in just a minute of new laws or additional laws or more draconian gun control laws, this is a man that had, as far as we can see, no evidence of mental illness, no evidence that he was maybe going to be flagged by the FBI. We do know a little bit about his family. I'll get to that in just a minute. But that's what I think becomes a little bit more difficult to try to kind of think through. So those are a couple of issues that we want to put on the table. I'll add some more in just a minute, but let's give a few of you a chance to join our conversation. Go to a first-time caller in Arizona. Richard, thank you for calling today.
Hi. Well, the reason I called is because it's pretty crazy when people blame another person for the person that caused the problem. They've shot, well, the man shot people, and then they blame the president for that. I mean, he had nothing to do with it. He was
he's just an easy target. And of course, this is why you just get so frustrated when you see some of this social media. This is all Trump's fault. He hasn't even been in office a year. I mean, you can come up with some reasons why you would be upset with Donald Trump. I understand those, but this is certainly not one of them. I don't think, right?
Yeah. It's not. You know, I know that the man that Trump is not. You know, he's not a perfect person. Nobody is, and he's just trying to do a job that he's never been. You know, he wasn't in politics before he got there, so he's learning, and his main problem is he likes to talk. You know, and so maybe if we took glitter away from him and he'd just do the things that he needs to do, we'd get further. You know, he would get further without having so much problems. But,
sure. Well, again, I think the point is that I hold the individuals responsible. One of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, are there things we could do that would make a difference? And so one of the articles we've posted, it's the second article there, is where the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi sent a letter to House Speaker Paul Ryan actually calling for the establishment of a select committee on gun violence to study and report back common sense legislation to help end this crisis. And the argument she makes in the letter is that the lives of at least 58, and of course it's more than that now, innocent men and women in Las Vegas were lost. Nearly 12,000 Americans have been killed by guns in 273 mass shootings in 2017, one for each day of the year. By the way, we can get into the inaccuracy of some of that, but nevertheless, that's what's in her letter. On the average, more than 90 Americans lose their lives to gun violence every day, a daily toll of heartbreak and tragedy in communities across America. So this is where the push will be right now to come up with new legislation. And again, the difficulty when you have this is to say, okay, when we do see some of these mass shootings, some of those perpetrators, these killers, are clearly mentally ill. Some of them are. Some of them have half-formed political notions, and so they do it for political reasons. And then some just want to kill as many people as possible and sometimes go down in the record books. So they're saying, okay, well then we need stricter gun control laws. And of course, the best example that is used even in this National Review piece is that you probably don't have any stricter gun control laws than you had in France at the time. And yet you look at the Kalashnikov rifles, the AK-47s that were used in the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and you recognize that's, not working because those individuals that want to perpetrate violence, in this case, of course, these were radical Muslims, but in other cases, they can still obtain those. And so we have a situation here where, as far as we can determine, this killer in Las Vegas obtained them, and there was nothing to flag him at all. No mental illness, no FBI background check that was failed. And so, again, you might say, well, then we still need to do something. And again, the suggestions are simply this. How about enforcing some of the existing weapons laws? Right now you have what are called straw buyers. Sometimes you have an individual buying a gun because the person that you're buying the gun for couldn't pass a background check. So to actually crack down on straw buyers, handing down stiffer sentences for violent gun crimes and things of that nature. Of course, that gets you on the other side as well, because then you have some of our liberal friends saying, well, we have too many people in the prisons already. Well, yes, but if you have somebody that is a perpetrator of a crime with a gun that was obtained illegally, I know where I would like them to spend a lot of the rest of their life, and that's behind bars where they wouldn't do it any further. And so those are some things. And, of course, we can talk about the issues of mental health and addiction. We can talk about issues of parole and probation. But, that doesn't play to Congress. This is why you have senators like Chris Murphy and certainly Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren and all sorts of other ones sending out social tweets and media saying this is why we need to have stricter gun control laws. But again, it's really hard to come up with any of those answers. So let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Bob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
How you doing?
Good. What would you like to add to our conversation?
I just wanted to tell you, I don't think this is one guy. That just doesn't make any sense. And he doesn't fit the profile. The kind of profile that he fits is an easy mark. He's a gambler, and he's got lots of money and no scruples, and probably got threatened in some way, or paid in, or probably threatened in some way for him to take the brunt of this. And
Sure.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit if it comes out that he is.
We'll take a break. I think we get the point there, and we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can you claim the First Amendment to get out of a ticket? CBM Ministries operates a release time Bible education program in Pennsylvania. Release time allows public school students to be released during the school day for religious classes located off campus, oftentimes at a local church. But it's not the release time that's at issue in this case. It's the way the students get from school to the church. When one of the drivers showed up at the school to pick up the kids, a state trooper noticed that the bus was not properly inspected. The trooper cited the driver for violating state law concerning school bus safety. As you might expect, without buses to safely transport students from school to release time education and back, CBM Ministries had a problem. So they filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit claimed that the enforcement of school bus safety laws on CBM Ministries vehicles substantially burdened its religious exercise. The court acknowledged that the law may have had an incidental impact upon the ministry's religious exercise, but it was actually entirely neutral towards religion. In other words, the law regulated school buses, whether used for religious or secular purposes. The law did not discriminate, nor was it applied in a discriminatory manner. Religious liberty protects against laws that discriminate on the basis of religion, but it probably won't get you out of that speeding ticket. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bob raised a good question. Is there something else that might have set off this particular killer? And that's one of the reasons why some of the law enforcement authorities would like to know a little bit more about his girlfriend, who's coming back to this country, was in the Philippines at the time. He also transferred money out there, and who knows what this is all going to bring about. But he doesn't fit the profile that we talk about so often. He violates the profile in almost every way. Yesterday we had one of our callers talk about age. I saw a chart that we actually actually could post, if you'd like to see it, about the age of those individuals that have been involved in mass shootings. And this is the oldest individual in some time that has been involved in a mass shooting. So he doesn't fit the profile there. Sometimes these are people down on their luck. Well, this is a man, he had houses in a number of places, probably was a millionaire. Now, of course, some people are suggesting maybe now he had huge gambling debts. Who knows? Well, there's all sorts of what ifs, but there are still a lot of questions here. And one of the reasons we posted that piece yesterday that we talked about, and we posted it today by David French, Las Vegas shooting, very, very strange. And since then, it's been quoted by some others, not necessarily saying there's a conspiracy, although that may be something that unravels or develops. But it just is a little bit less predictable than you might have thought about. One of the issues that I wanted to bring to your table is a chart that many people have been quoting, and lots of times this is really helpful to look at those numbers. And this actually comes from a research study done by Mark Perry. He's at the American Enterprise Institute, and now I have the whole 8 pages of this. But we took one of the charts that I wanted to highlight that other talk show hosts have mentioned. And if you go to the Point of View Facebook page right now, Shamila put this up here about 45 minutes ago, and to describe the chart before you even see it is to go back and look at where we were back in about 1993 and then bring it up to the modern time, to our current time. And so you look at the percent changes since 1993. The number of privately owned firearms has increased 56%. But since that time, the gun homicide rate has dropped by 49%. Now, you might remember that if you've listened to this program before, we've had people like Dr. John Lott on the program. He wrote a book years ago called More Guns, Less Crime. And when you look at these percentages, it is interesting to see that one graph is going higher, 56% increase in privately owned firearms, and the gun homicide rate is dropped by 49%, almost identical. Now, that's just one of many charts, but it's the one that I think is most striking. Or one of the other charts, which we haven't posted here, guns per person versus gun homicide rate, again, going from 1993 to 2003, you see the same sort of thing. It's looking at it using different percentages. But the point we're making is that we are not a more dangerous society because there are more guns. In some respects, you could argue that we're a less dangerous one. Now, I'll be the first to admit that correlation doesn't mean causation, but I think we all have seen over the years with concealed carry permits and other things that those states where there is the possibility of an individual who intends harm towards you, a murderer, a rapist, a burglar, whatever it might be, when there is at least a reason for them to hesitate. That is, if I go into this home, this person might be armed. If I assault this person, he or she might be carrying a firearm. That is a very significant deterrent. So even though we have people arguing that people that are gun owners are dangerous, it actually seems to be going the other way. So let me encourage you to go to the Point of View Facebook page. Just go to, again, Facebook and then Point of View Radio Talk Show. You'll see that article that we've posted. You can see that chart. Of course, you can then follow it to the American Enterprise Institute. But while we're talking about gun owners, there was a woman yesterday that got fired because of something she put on Facebook. She actually, I think, was a legal counsel at CBS, Haley Guffman Gold, who posted this. If they won't do anything when children are murdered, meaning, again, I guess Sandy Hook, then I have no hope for repugs. That's for Republicans, but also repugnant people. I have no hope that repugs will ever do the right thing. Went on to say, I'm actually not even sympathetic because country music fans often are Republican gun toters. That shows you the level of animus that is out there right now towards individuals that maybe are gun owners, people that are country music fans, people that are Republicans. She was fired. Now she put out an apology, and it's the typical apology. Well, that was not me. Oh, yes, it was. That's exactly what you thought, and you took the time to write it out, and we got a chance to see it. So, again, those are just a couple of issues that I think illustrate the kind of divided country we find ourselves in right now. Let's go to Missouri, KTTK, and Judy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I just so happened that we live in the country, and our plumber was over at our house and did a lot of work. We invited him to have some food with us. But he began to talk about the Antifa, and according to what I spoke to the man earlier, you have talked about Antifa, the anti-fascist, on your program.
Uh-huh.
And he, along with a lot of other country people, are part of a group called 3% militiamen. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but supposedly in our history, 3% of really Americans are the ones that really fought for independence and were really involved in that. And that was a very small number, which was obviously a divine action on our part that we won the revolution. But anyway, he talked a lot about the group and what their hopes are. They're not a secret group at all. Like I said, they're called 3% militia. And this anti-fascist group, or Antifa, is out of England. And I just read recently, or heard, that Homeland Security has dubbed them to be now an international terrorist organization. On the internet and with the sources that this man has with all their groups that are around the country, this anti-fascist group, Antifa, have claimed that this is their man. And this is kind of all over the internet. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, and again, I tend to wait until I see some people that have a little better credibility because, you had the Islamic State claim that this was done and that he had converted to Islam. Doesn't seem to be any evidence here. But again, the anti-fascists, the Antifa, are again, maybe some individuals, maybe they have had some influence there. Because he's dead, we don't know. I am hoping that when we talk to his girlfriend, maybe we can find out if there were some other connections. It might not surprise us. We've seen some of these other shootings that have been against people. And again, picking a country concert, is there any meaning to that? Why did he use the Mandalay? There are just a lot of questions that we haven't answered. And we can sit here and speculate, but as soon as we get better evidence or we learn a little bit more, I hope that we'll find out. I, at this point, really don't want to speculate anymore because, as we've said before, sometimes some of the early reports are wrong, and we've got too many people out here writing too many things on social media right now that obviously don't know what they're talking about when it comes to gun control and some of these other motivations. So we'll find out. I have a full bank of phone calls, but I don't have the time to get to them. But, tomorrow we're going to have our roundtable. And so if you would like to call back, we'll give you that opportunity to express your opinions or your thoughts or ask your questions about what has transpired. And today we kind of pushed a little of it off the table because we wanted you to know a little bit more about the Reformation. And I think Erwin Lutzer did an outstanding job of educating us. And if you didn't have a chance to hear it, take the time to download the podcast and listen to it. But we are simply out of time today. I want to thank Doug for his help behind the scene, as well as Steve. And we will be back having our Millennial Roundtable tomorrow. And I'm sure we'll be talking about Las Vegas as well as a number of other issues. So that's all we have for today. Visit the website, pointofview.net, and we'll be back tomorrow to take your phone calls. We'll see you then.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.